Are you aware of any of your critics? Are you aware of any critics of your work who are deep and credible? Well, of course not. Someone who at a minimum had read Maps of Meaning. Well, it's a complicated question. I've never read a critic of Jung who actually understood what Jung was talking about. And I actually knew a number of scientists, including Jaak Panksepp, who wrote Affective Neuroscience, which is a great book, who is a real admirer of Jung and the psychoanalysts. I mean, Panksepp was very interested in neuropsychoanalysis, and many of the people who are interested in the neuroscience of emotion were also very interested in the psychoanalytic types. Most of the people who criticize Jung don't have a clue what he was talking about, and it's not surprising because he's very difficult. No, I haven't come across a credible critic of Maps of Meaning. And I think, and I don't know, I mean, that may also be because, until I became notorious, let's say, over the last couple of years, was it influential? It did pretty well. The book did pretty well for an academic work. It was no massive seller, although it's hit the bestseller list now in the audio version, which I think is pretty amusing. That's the New York Times bestseller list, given that they wouldn't list 12 Rules for Life. So I don't know if the lack of criticism is a consequence of its lack of influence or its difficulty. I've had social psychologists talk to me a little bit about the ideas of Maps of Meaning, and I've tried to talk to them, especially the people who are interested in such things as terror management. But they usually don't know the neuropsychology and they don't know the mythology. And there are very few people who are versed in the world of neuropsychology and in the world of mythology simultaneously. And I'm drawing these parallels, and they're very complicated parallels. So I made the assumption, I studied these Russian neuropsychologists, Vinogradova and Sokolov, who were students of Alexander Luria, brilliant students, and they discovered this phenomena called the orienting reflex, which I wrote a lot about in Maps of Meaning. And the orienting reflex is your automatic response to what is unknown. And you have a very deep automatic response to what is unknown, and that really means that the unknown is a conceptual category, and it was my proposition, it developed in Maps of Meaning, that the unknown is a fundamental cognitive category, or maybe even a fundamental category of reality, depending on how you define reality. Like I'm defining reality phenomenologically as experienced, but as experienced universally and as experienced biologically by animals and by human beings. The unknown is something like unexplored territory, and it's reasonable to assume that there's a fundamental distinction, even neurologically, between the patterns of action that obtain in territories that you've thoroughly explored and the pattern of action that's necessary when you step outside the domain that you're familiar with, where your reaction as a prey animal or perhaps as a predator has to become paramount. And so the fundamental proposition in Maps of Meaning is something like the domain of the unknown that's reflexively responded to with the orienting reflex, which is a very, very fundamental reflex and basic to the entire process of learning itself, is reflected in our mythological representations. And I think that is a absolutely, if that's true, then it's a profound realization. I wouldn't exactly say discovery, because I don't know if you bring two literatures together that have never been conjoined, if that constitutes a discovery. But I've certainly never found anyone who was able to suggest to me any reason why I should assume that hypothesis is incorrect. And I've had pretty damn bright graduate students, and they've gone off to be credible professors, and most of them have maintained that viewpoint, and I think Colin DeYoung is probably foremost among them. So, it would be nice actually if I could encounter critics of Maps of Meaning who were credible, because I'm sure there's some things in it that I wrote that were wrong. And I don't know what they are. I mean, I've been thinking about the damn book since 1982, and I've been thinking about it a lot, and my work in 12 Rules for Life is an extension of what I did in Maps of Meaning, but I can't see holes in it, and nothing I've learned since then, and that might be a consequence of my own stupidity, but in narrow-mindedness, is I haven't seen any reason to radically revise the propositions that I put forth in Maps of Meaning. I think they're credible. I think the idea that, and I think there's actually more evidence now that the propositions were correct than there were when I wrote the book originally. The idea, for example, that our hemispheres are specialized, one for action in the domain of the known and the other for action in the domain of the unknown. I think that's well supported by the work of, what's his name? Another student of Luria, Greenberg. Is it Greenberg? Elkonin Goldberg. And Ramachandran as well, a physician who's well versed in neuroscience, has a theory that's quite similar. So no, I don't think Maps of Meaning has been subject to proper critical evaluation. So, and then with regards to critics of 12 Rules for Life, well, most of the time they don't criticize what I say. They criticize their, what would you call it, ideologically motivated, pathological oversimplification of who they wish I was so they didn't have to take anything I said seriously. And those people don't constitute critics. They constitute the chattering puppets of a certain form of ideological possession.